Hi everybody, welcome back to a time of looking at the Word of our Master. Today we're going to be going further into Matthew chapter 16, and this is actually a really fascinating contrast to Jesus' conversation with Peter in the last section, because Peter got something really right, with God's help, of course. God revealed to Peter, Petros, that Jesus is the anointed, the Son of the living God. And so Peter expressed that and received such a beautiful honor from Jesus, being told that Jesus would give him the keys to the kingdom, and that what he bound on earth would be bound in the heavens, what he loosed on earth would be loosed in the heavens. I mean, just remarkable, right? Well, then we get to this thing where Peter blows it and Jesus has to rip into him pretty good. I want to look at this together. First of all, just to observe our Master in action, and also to consider what does that mean for us in our life with him, because he's the same Master, and we're wanting to be loyal to Jesus just like Peter was, knowing that we will get it wrong just like Peter did. And we would just kind of want to know, how does our Master interact with us, and take comfort from the fact that even in rebuke, and even in harsh rebuke sometimes, our Master is steadfast, carries on with us anyway, just as he did with good old Simon Peter. So, this is in Matthew chapter 16, just following that exchange with Peter where he is commended so highly. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some of you who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." So man, there's a lot going on here. We're just going to take it a bit at a time, as we've been doing. I want to look at this first exchange between Jesus and Peter specifically, before we get to what he said to the other disciples. So first of all, Jesus is from this moment forward, according to Matthew, now that the declaration has been made and accepted, confirmed, that Jesus is the anointed one, that he is the Son of God. And if you remember what those things indicate, as you know, I sketched them out a few videos back. They probably didn't fully understand what those things meant, the implications of all of that, but they at least understood, based on their understanding of what the Anointed One would be about, what it means that he was the Son of God. They at least understood that he was those things, whether they got it right, what it meant or not. So now that that's out in the open, Peter said it, and Jesus affirmed it. He now moves into a time of dropping this major, devastating word on them, that now that we can all agree that I'm the anointed one, the Son of the living God, I just need you to know that means I'm going to be rejected by the leaders of the people, I'm going to be killed, and God's going to raise me the third day. Huh? It's just like, wait a minute, what? Beside the fact they're not allowed to tell anybody about who he is? I mean, this is an incredible burden to put on them. And yet he did. And he gets to, because he's rabbi, he's master. He's the anointed and the Son of the living God. He gets to put this on them. But I just wanted to point out, this is a lot he's putting on them. Number one, don't tell anybody, which in some sense they might have been relieved, because that would have invited a lot of persecution, perhaps, for them to come out and make this claim about their rabbi. But it would have also been hard not to mention it if they were fully persuaded it's true, because they want their fellow Jews to know about this and to celebrate it and to join the cause and all the rest, right? I mean, there's a movement happening here. Don't forget that context. There's a Jesus movement happening, a groundswell of popular support for this man who has been powerful to heal and to teach with authority and all those things. So maybe a mixture of relief/burden that they aren't able to talk about it, but also that he's laying on them the fate that awaits him, and they are supposed to do what about this? Nothing? They're not supposed to do anything about it? Just let it happen? So Peter's response, I think, is understandable even if it's wrong. Okay? Peter, this is an important detail of this, took him aside and began to rebuke him. Wait. Maybe Peter, because of this wonderful commendation he had received just in the previous episode, maybe Peter thinks it's his place to show Jesus his great loyalty. Because after all, he's going to get the keys of the kingdom. You know, what he's going to bind is going to be bound in the heavens. What he's going to loose is going to be loosed in the heavens. Maybe he's overestimating what that means for him and his position with the rabbi. But whatever this is coming from, Peter takes Jesus aside. Now, picture it with me. I think will help us understand Jesus' response to him. Rabbi Jesus would usually be in front of the disciples, and they would be behind him in terms of travel, because that's what you do. You literally follow this man where he's going. He sets the course, he decides where they're headed, and they follow him, like in location and in travel, right? But also in obeying his commands and whatever else. In this moment, Peter takes Jesus aside and they're face to face. And I can just picture Peter and his zeal leaning in, maybe even pointing a finger. I hope he didn't point a finger. Oh, Peter, don't point a finger. But just getting in there. Never, Lord. I'll never let this happen to you. And what were the other apostles, disciples thinking as they watched this exchange? Because, I mean, you can read people's body language, right? Man, Peter's really going at it over there. What is he doing? Why is he doing this? Jesus did not take kindly to Peter's zealous refusal to accept Jesus' words. Peter just told Jesus no, basically. And he did so face to face. Now, it appears Peter has forgotten his place, because Peter belongs with the other disciples behind Jesus, following his lead. And here Peter is trying to take the lead and decide what ought to be going on. So listen to Jesus' response. I'm sure he gets Peter's motive. I'm sure he understands this comes from a place of loyalty and love. But ultimately what Peter is demonstrating is a lack of trust. Because Rabbi Jesus said this is what's going to go down. Disciple Peter said no. I won't let it. Now, did Jesus, when I was reading that to you, did it sound like Jesus was looking for their help to prevent anything? Nah. He was saying what is about to happen. And again, there's no sense that he was like, boy, I wish something could be done to make this not happen. We see that in the Garden of Gethsemane as it's about to happen, but we don't see that here. Jesus here is simply speaking the purpose of the Anointed One, the Son of God, to be rejected, to die, and to be raised to life. Okay, so here's Jesus' answer to Peter's rebuke. He turns around and rebukes him right back. Jesus turned and said to Peter. Now that's interesting. Jesus turns. So I'm trying to picture this. If Peter took Jesus aside, maybe they were side by side as they walked. So Jesus pulls Rabbi Jesus aside, and Peter, as they're walking along together, maybe he's not face to face. So this extra detail in this next verse makes me rethink my picture of it. Maybe they're walking side by side, and Peter is speaking forward, maybe looking to the side to his master, trying to talk to his master. And so the other disciples are still behind. So if I'm picturing this right now, Jesus turns to look at his follower, who has come up next to him, maybe, to be kind of peers with him, so to speak, in their position. And notice what he says. Get behind me, Satan. Now in the NIV, it's a capital S on Satan. I really wish that they hadn't done that. And I wish they had translated the word rather than turned it into a name. Here's why. First of all, the get behind me part probably has to do with literally, physically, go back with the other disciples where you belong. That's your position. You're not my peer and you're not my leader, right? Get behind me with the other disciples. I'm leading this. I am master. I am rabbi. So first of all, Peter, you forgot your place. Go back to your place as my servant and as my disciple. That is not to humiliate, I don't think. That is not to degrade. That is simply to remind Peter where he fits in all this. And remember what humility means. True humility, scripturally speaking. Humility means knowing your place in the order of things that God has created and staying there. Not trying to go above it or below it. Staying in the place you've been given in the order of God. In the order of things, Peter is a disciple and a servant. Stay there, Peter. You're getting too big for your britches here. You're trying to lead something that you are not qualified to lead, bro. And secondly, he calls him Satan. We would say Satan. But the reason that I don't like the fact that the NIV, and not just the NIV, but Bible translations use the word Satan here with a capital S, is that this is the figure known as the Satan. The word Satan, that the name Satan is based on, is a word that means enemy or adversary. Comes from the Hebrew. And so Satan, the Hebrew word, is a word that you'd use of just an enemy or an adversary of any kind, human or spiritual. And so the idea that Jesus would be calling Peter Satan, capital S Satan, referring to him as the great enemy of God, the person that we know as Satan or the devil, it just causes us to assume all kinds of things about what Jesus is getting at here that I'm not sure we can assume. For instance, was Satan trying to stop Jesus from fulfilling his purpose? Why would we think that when Satan enters into Judas to get the betrayal to happen? Like, this just creates all of these weird theories or speculations. And a lot of them don't always add up. And I just don't think that's the point of what Jesus is getting at, saying that Satan's trying to stop him from going to the cross. The fact is, the powers of darkness didn't understand what God was up to. They just didn't. So the idea that Satan was trying to stop the great mystery of God from being accomplished assumes he understood what the great mystery of God was, right? No, Jesus uses a word that simply means adversary. He was saying, get behind me, adversary. You're being adversarial to me right now. Peter, you're not working with me here, you're working against me. You're trying to stop me from doing what I've been called to do, Peter. I would just really encourage you not to assume Jesus is in some way implicating Peter as being controlled by or in league with Satan right here. But notice why he calls him an adversary or an enemy. He said, you are a stumbling block to me. You're trying to trip me up here. Now, I wonder, I don't know this, of course, but I wonder if Jesus partly was saying this because it was already hard enough for Jesus to think about what lay ahead of him. For his, I would say, friend, yes, but also just his co-worker, his servant, his disciple to come and express this kind of zeal on his behalf. I don't think Jesus had pure resentment about it. It's possible that Jesus actually appreciated this, and that this was making it even harder for Jesus to do what he knew was needing to be done. That's why I don't think we can see Jesus here as just being cold and just calculated, just a machine. And so Peter's great overture of concern and love and zeal is just lost on Jesus. I think he took all of that in. I mean, he's the most profound and fully orbed person ever. So he's taking all of that in. And I think he's pointing out to Peter, you're not helping. You're making this harder on me. You're making my purpose even harder to fulfill. You're getting in the way, Peter, of doing what needs done. And then he explains why Peter is doing it. He says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Peter, you're going to have to trust me on this one. My Father has a purpose for this future that lay ahead of me. You're going to have to embrace that. That's the concern of God. The concern of God isn't primarily on my physical well-being, Peter. It's on the greater good that this rejection, death, and resurrection are going to accomplish. And I'm just kind of filling in the blanks as best I understand them. That the concerns of God that Peter's missing are a mystery at this point still. It's not clear what all this is about yet. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight. The apostles in their writings show us very clearly, if probably not entirely, but they show us really clearly what God's been up to in this mystery that finally is being unveiled for us in what Jesus did. So, again, I'm not sure that Jesus is as angry as it may seem, but he really needs Peter to get this. He needs Peter to stay in his place and let the Master lead, because God's purposes are not something Peter could understand at this time. He says, what you have in mind are the concerns of the merely human concerns. So, number one, that might mean his connection to Jesus sentimentally and relationally. He doesn't want this to happen to Jesus. Who in the world wants to hear that someone really close to them is going to go be horribly rejected publicly and then killed? Like, who wants to hear that? Nobody wants to hear that. So Peter would reject that, I'm sure, just as a relational and sentimental piece of his loyalty to Jesus. But also, I imagine the idea that they just had it confirmed that Jesus is the Anointed One, the Son of the living God. We can't leave that out of this equation. The idea that he would be defeated, right? That he would be killed, which means defeated, that this whole messianic movement Jesus has already been starting through his ministry, that would be crushed and put down. Of course the disciples, not just Peter, of course the disciples would not want to see that happen. Of course they would reject that too in their inner selves, not wanting to accept that. So on the human side, they're wanting Jesus to fulfill the messianic purpose they have in mind for Israel, throw off Rome, restore the righteousness of God's people, let the prophecies of the Old Covenant be fulfilled in terms of righteousness flowing from Zion the way they understood that. It's human concerns, right? The human understanding of things, what they wanted to happen. So the fact that God is on a totally different plane of understanding of what needs to happen for the good of the whole world, not just for the good of Israel, and the ultimate triumph over death, not just the triumph over an earthly human power. I mean, these things that God is just operating on such a different level in his vision and in his purpose. Peter needed to just accept that. You're not going to see it right now, Peter, so just fall in line, follow me, because I'm going where I know the Father needs us to go. Peter didn't have a good enough vision to lead them. He's very short-sighted, very mortal in his concern, not the big picture kingdom concern. Now, all of that I think is so fascinating just to think about Jesus' interaction with this really dear disciple of his, this good friend of his. Now what I want to do is just think about, because we're not in that situation, right? I want to think about the fact that when Jesus deals with us, he is going to be as blunt and as honest and as harsh as love requires. Which means that there are times that we are so locked into our current understanding, our current view of things, that no matter our motive, our motive could be loyalty, it could be zeal for God's purposes, it could be all those good things, but they're just plain misdirected. And there are going to be times when we actually want to go out there and do things for the Lord, say things that we think are somehow going to honor Him, but we need to be open to the fact we could be wrong. We could be missing something. And that doesn't mean don't ever do anything. That means be very open in prayer before, during, and after to the rebuke our Lord might have to give us, because He understands it more fully. So we need to be careful that we're open to what the Lord Jesus would show us about what we're doing and saying, even if there's nothing impure in our motive. Maybe there's something missing in our understanding. And I can see applications of this in just about every sphere of life. I'm learning in this exact thing as I go through to be humble as I approach different things, different topics in Scripture that I disagree with my brothers and sisters on. I need to be humble and realize, I don't see everything yet. So I try to use language that's aware of that and say, my best understanding as far as I can tell from the Scriptures, that kind of language helps keep you grounded and you don't overstep. Because you should be, just like I should be as disciples, anticipating further growing, further learning, more and more a vision of God expanding as I keep developing as a disciple, so that whenever I speak and act now, there are things I can be certain about for sure, that I can speak of with absolute certainty about the gospel, about things that are clear cut. But there's a lot of it, most topics actually. There's more things that I need to be humble about and leave the door open for not only growth in my own self, but the people I'm talking to, and let them understand. Look, what I'm sharing with you, I'm very confident is true, but there's room for a lot more as we go. Things when we deal with politics, political issues on the public social front, we need to be open to the idea that we might be right about the sliver we're seeing, but there might be a lot more to it. So let's speak humbly. Let's be open to learning. Let's be open to other voices, not because everyone's going to be right, but precisely because they're not, including me. I'm not going to be right about everything, no matter what my motives are. And by the way, this helps us be gracious to other disciples, because Peter, I think we can be confident in saying Peter had really good motivation. He was just wrong. And if we can view other disciples that way, that I shouldn't demonize them if they disagree with me or say something different than I do on, let's say, the political front or even the religious front. Because it's very possible, and hopefully it's likely, their motives are good. They actually are trying to bring honor to Jesus and show Him as wonderful to the world. But it's possible they're just wrong, or that I am. So I don't want to come at somebody as an opponent, a Satan. I don't want to come at them as an adversary. I want to come at them with humility and say, we've drawn some really different conclusions here, but I think we both want the same thing. Can we talk about this? Because I want us to be united as we serve our Master together. That kind of spirit and heart that's open to the fact that I could be missing something, or perhaps you are, or perhaps both of us are, that is the unity of the church, where our loyalty to Jesus is what unites us and His loyalty to us. But all of these other things that divide us, we can talk about these. We can work on these, because the loyalty that unites us is actually the fundamental issue. The other things we need to talk about in love with each other. I mean, so just this whole episode, I think, is so clarifying to us about how to treat each other and how to approach our Master in our own discipleship. Lots more examples that we could talk about. In fact, you might even have some that come to your mind, and I would love it if you'd comment, share that with others, because this episode here, again, just reaffirms motive is not enough. We can get it wrong. Jesus needs to correct us. He doesn't just look at good motives and be tapping us on the head and being like, oh, well, you tried. No, he might actually come at you and say, get behind me, adversary. You're making this harder than it needs to be. And, let's admit it. The way we treat each other and the way we approach things with too much pride a lot of times is a stumbling block to what Jesus wants to do. It gets in the way. It makes him look bad. It causes some people to turn away from Christ and his gospel when they haven't even seen the real thing yet, because we might be giving a false picture of it. That's not attractive. It's not alluring in the true, beautiful sense that the gospel should be. So, just a word for you to consider, that I'm certainly considering, a word to bring us back to humility. Get behind Jesus. Don't be his adversary in his purposes. Don't be a stumbling block to what he's wanting to accomplish. Let's approach all this with humility, with a readiness to learn, and show that grace to others. Amen. I love you. God bless you. May he uphold you until next time. His beloved, as he is ours.